Well, breaking news, and presidential spokesperson Khusela Diko has been granted leave of absence. In March, Khusela Diko's husband, Amabaka King Madzikazi Tandisizwe Diko, was reportedly awarded 2 tenders amounting to 125 million rand for the supply of personal protective equipment. And of course, there have been mounting calls for Diko to step down while her husband's tender is investigated. She has already, all along rather, maintained she never took, or he never took up the tender deal, and no money was paid. Well, let's get the very latest from our political editor, Vuyo Mvoko. Good evening, Vuyo. So this news is just in. Tell us what you know.
Well, the minister in the presidency's office, Jackson Tembo's office, that is, issued a very short statement not too long ago, saying she had requested the presidency to grant her a leave of absence while she continues to deal with this matter. It doesn't, of course, it's not going to stop, maybe I should say, a lot of other people to still ask questions, because part of the reason you're seeing a lot of outrage, a lot of that outrage is coming from her own comrades who think that while they may have been sleeping, there were other comrades of theirs who were actually helping themselves to these COVID-19 tenders. So they will still say, well, is she going to be paid during this period? Because remember, these investigations are not going to end in a few days or even weeks. They may just take a very long time. I mean, you're talking about more than 70 companies on this tender alone, and 2.2 billion rands is involved. Lawyers are going to be dragged into this. Politicians are going to argue and fight over who's right and who's wrong, who should be punished and who shouldn't. And that, of course, is not going to go anywhere. So still questions are going to be asked, and that's really what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And Vuyo, is it clear she took the initiative to step down, or was she suspended? Do you know categorically whose move was it? From the statement, she asked, but then you know how politicians work. You know, the reality may be completely different. And that's precisely why having worked in this area for a good couple of decades, one doesn't really attach a great deal of significance in what the ANC is currently busy with, which is to do interviews with officials, or its deployees, as they put it, it says, are implicated in these tenders, to hear their side of the story. And the reason I have no faith really in what they are doing is because they simply do not have a record of acting decisively when things like these actually happen. I have more faith in what the Special Investigations Unit is currently doing. But there again, I mean, it's going to take a great deal of time, because once the SIU is done with its investigation, it will then take the evidence that it has and pass it on to the National Prosecuting Authority. That then unleashes another or other processes which, as I was saying earlier, may just take a bit of time. So this is a political move while the investigation goes on. Let's just recap what we know about these 2 disputed tenders, which were, we understand, awarded to the amount of some 125 million rand to the presidential spokesperson's husband. So Khusela Diko's husband was awarded this tender. Now, she says she didn't know in the beginning that he'd got it. When she realized he'd been awarded that tender, she said, don't take it up. It doesn't look great. And she says no money was ever given to him. If she's right, is it then a storm in a teacup? Well, assuming she is right, but questions would still remain. How long had this company been in existence? What did they do? Did they break any of the regulation? Because remember, even though given the period that we are in now, there was a relaxation of a lot of the regulations that they would have been in place, but there still are regulations. Prices, for example, are controlled. You cannot charge beyond or above a certain amount with regard to masks, for example, and there are processes that have been stipulated. So even if, as her husband is arguing, no money may have accrued to them, questions would still be asked about how they got the tender in the first place, who was involved, were they assisted in any way, and that would begin to give us a sense of just how endemic, this corruption is, even under the current administration, if, of course, this proves to be true. But, of course, there are other people who are as well connected as Khusela Diko is, but who may not necessarily be working in the president's office. I mean, you're talking about 70 companies altogether. Who are these people? How did they get the tenders? All of that has to come to the fore, because the minute you, as Praveen Gordon likes to say, connect the dots, I'm sure we are in for a lot of surprise and disappointment from people we would have thought were about doing the right thing and taking us out of the quagmire that we've been in for more than a decade at least.
We also know that the health MEC Bandile Masuku, his wife Loyiso Masuku, has also been sort of the suggestions, implications. Is that purely because she's friends with Khusela Diko? Is there anything concrete in terms of allegations against her on the table?
Well, there's that, and how people who are in the know would tell you she tends to conduct herself and often even punches above her weight. I remember not too long ago, in fact only last week, with one of the stories that we were doing, our reporter was on the scene at the invitation of the MEC. We had a bit of a tiff on social media, because then she attributed, or she held us responsible for what her husband said on record. The question that you ask is why? Would she want to go out of her way, in spite of objective facts, to want to protect her husband? So questions have been asked about her conduct, about things that people allege she is involved in. But of course, what will provide us with answers, because allegations remain allegations until, of course, these things are tested, which is exactly what your SIUs and your NPAs are currently busy with. But we'll see whether indeed the allegations that have been leveled at her are indeed true.
One has to look at what this means for the president himself. This is his right-hand woman, Khusela Diko. She's always got his back, and he loses her at a time when he's dealing with big public fallout over the government's handling of COVID-19. Surely this is a massive political blow for him, or am I overstating it?
It is, but in part, I think the president too would have to look at how things have been happening up until now. I mean, why did it take so long for a proclamation to be signed? Because there had been evidence for quite some time that some improper conduct was, could have been, like a lot of people, could have really engaged in improper and corrupt processes. But that was allowed to go on for a while, and no one really gave attention to that proclamation to be signed until there was a great deal of pressure. And it's no coincidence that that pressure now is coming from within the ANC itself. The people who are now shouting the loudest are in fact not members of opposition parties, but ANC members as well as their alliance partners. So it's all now beginning to unravel, and suddenly pronouncements are being made about what is going to be done, the investigations and how they are going to be fast-tracked, and so on. The question is why? Why wasn't that done right from the onset?
What happens practically now? This is a 2.2 billion rand tender. The Diko involvement is 125 million. As you say, there's some 70 other companies. Have these companies already started rolling out PPP? Does it mean that there's going to be a massive grinding halt and a potential lack of supplies in Gauteng?
No, some of them have started delivering. In fact, Ms. Khusela Diko's husband had already delivered, but what he didn't saw on his account, what didn't happen, he says, was him invoicing and then getting the money. So he regards what he has already done or delivered on as a donation. So people have already delivered, and monies have actually been paid already. Now, at this stage, there is no indication as to whether all these people who are involved are going to be asked to stop what they are doing, or even return the monies that they have already been paid. But of course, the law has a way of recouping, some of these monies. Although, if you look at the VBS situation, in spite of being paid millions and sometimes billions of rands, people always come back and plead poverty and say they can't even afford 10,000 rand bails. So that too sort of often happens.
And just briefly, we know that now Khusela Diko, the president's spokesperson, has taken a leave of absence so this can be sorted out. But what does that really mean? Does it mean the SIU has to complete its investigation, or does the ANC do an internal probe? And how long might any of those processes take?
Well, you see, that's what I was saying about questions that are going to be raised about her leave of absence. Because this thing, yes, as much as the president said that these investigations and the prosecution would be speeded up, remember, once you get lawyers involved, things tend to drag on. So what happens during that period? Does she stay at home with her salary still being paid? And questions will indeed be asked around that. But as things stand, none of us really knows what's going to happen and when exactly this will be, this process will be concluded.
Well, Vuyo Mvoko, thank you very much. I'm sure we will speak to you again this evening. I'm sure that you have a lot of people you want to phone and find out more details, and that you will bring those to us as you come upon them. So thank you very much for updating us on that breaking news story this evening. The news that the president's spokesperson, Khusela Diko, has stepped aside to allow the investigation of a tender given to her husband's company amounting to 125 million rand for personal protective equipment that was granted by the Gauteng Health Department.